There's a story that every child knows. A piper arrives in a plague-ridden town. He plays his flute. The rats follow him into a river and drown. The mayor refuses to pay him, so the piper plays again. And this time, it's the children who follow. The mountain opens. They walk inside. The end. You know the lesson. Don't break your word. Pay what you owe. Tidy little moral. Except, here is what nobody tells you. The earliest written account of this story, the one recorded closest to the actual event, doesn't mention rats. Not a single one. The rats didn't show up in this story for 275 years. They were added, long after the fact, by people who needed the story to make sense. What the original records actually say is this. On the 26th of June, 1284, 130 children vanished from the town of Hamelin, Germany. The date is in the town's official documents. There's a street in Hamelin today where no music has been played in 700 years, in memory of the day they left. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a town that lost its children, and then built a monster to explain why. I promise you, the truth is stranger, and it's darker, because magic would mean nobody's to blame. Welcome to Exhumed Legends. The version you grew up with. The Pied Piper of Hamelin, medieval Germany, a town overrun by rats. A mysterious stranger arrives, a piper, dressed in patchwork clothes of every color. He makes a deal. Pay him and he'll rid the town of every rat. He plays. The rats follow. They pour out of every building, every alley, every cellar. And they follow the music straight into the river. Every last one of them. Gone. The mayor looks at the clean, silent streets, and he decides not to pay. So the piper plays again, a different tune, and this time it's the children who come out. 130 of them, following the music through the town, out through the gate, up into the hills. A cave opens in the side of the mountain. The children walk in. The mountain closes. One child was lame and couldn't keep up. He turned back. One was deaf and never heard the music at all. They're the only ones who came home. The town mourns. The piper vanishes. The mountain stays shut forever. That's the story. Generations of children have gone to sleep with that image in their heads. A colorful stranger, a flute, and a door in a hillside that opens once and closes forever. Now let's talk about what's actually real. The single most important thing to understand about the Pied Piper is this. The rats were invented. Not by the Brothers Grimm, though they certainly popularized the version most people know. The rats appear in writing for the first time in 1559. That's a full 275 years after the supposed event in Hamelin. The earliest sources, the ones written by people who were closer in time to whatever actually happened, tell a completely different story. The Lüneburg manuscript, written around 1440, is one of the oldest surviving accounts. It reads, "In the year 1284, on the day of John and Paul, it was the 26th of June, by a piper, clothed in many kinds of colors, 130 children born in Hamelin were seduced, and lost at the Calvary near the Koppen. No rats, no plague, no broken deal over payment. Just a man in colorful clothes, and 130 missing children." There's also the church window. The original stained glass window in Hamelin's Market Church depicted the piper and the children, and scholars believe it was installed within living memory of the event, possibly as early as 1300, within 20 years of whatever actually happened. That window was destroyed in 1660, but copies and descriptions survived. And then there's the street. In the town of Hamelin today, there's a road called Ungelosenstrasse, which translates to the street without drums. No music is played on it. No band marches down it. Weddings that pass through must do so in silence. This has been the custom for 7 centuries. The town still formally commemorates June 26th, not as a fairy tale, as a loss. Think about what that means. A community maintains a mourning tradition for 700 years. You don't do that for a myth. You do that because something happened. The question is, what? Historians and folklorists have been arguing about this for centuries, and there's no consensus. But there are several theories, each one darker than the fairy tale. In 1212, just 70 years before the Hamelin event, a movement swept through Europe in which thousands of children and young people marched south, convinced they could reclaim the Holy Land through faith alone. Most never came home. Many were sold into slavery by the merchants who promised to carry them across the sea. The shape fits: a charismatic leader, a crowd of young followers, a long march with no return. The timing is off, 1212 versus 1284, but the Crusades were ongoing, and smaller movements happened throughout the century. Medieval Europe experienced repeated outbreaks of what we now call mass psychogenic illness, events where entire communities were seized by involuntary behavior, dancing, convulsions, visions. The dancing plague of 1518 in Strasbourg killed dozens of people who literally could not stop moving. Similar events were recorded in 1237 and 1278, both within 50 years of Hamelin. Could the children have been caught in one of these episodes? Could the piper be a metaphor for whatever triggered it? Maybe, but it still doesn't explain where they went. Some researchers believe a sudden catastrophe, a landslide, a flood, an outbreak of disease killed the children of Hamelin outright, and that the community, unable to process the grief, constructed a narrative around it. The piper, in this reading, is a way of giving shape to something shapeless, a personification of loss. There's something deeply human in that, and something deeply sad. The theory most historians find most credible, and it is, quietly, the most unsettling. The Oostsiedlung, or Eastern Settlement, was one of the largest organized migrations in medieval history, from roughly 1100 to 1400. German-speaking communities sent waves of settlers east into what is now Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary, the Baltic states. These were territories being colonized, and they needed people, farmers, craftsmen, young adults who could work the land. The recruitment was organized. Agents called locators, from the Latin to place, traveled from town to town, making their pitch: land, freedom, a new life unclaimed. No lord over you, no inheritance that will never come. They dressed distinctively, colorfully, so they would be recognized, so people would know what they were offering before they even opened their mouths. They performed, possibly. In 1284, Hamelin was a prosperous but crowded town in the grip of a rigid feudal order. If you were a second or third son, there was no land coming to you. If you were an apprentice, the guild might never open. If you were a young woman with no dowry, your options were narrow and getting narrower. And then a man in bright clothes shows up in the market square, promising something better, east, new land, a real future. 130 people decided to go. They left on June 26th. Their parents never saw them again. And this is the part that gets me. Historians studying surnames and dialects in Eastern Germany and the Baltic states have found clusters. Families with names and speech patterns that don't belong where they are. Names that trace back to the Hamelin region. Names that got there in the 13th century and stayed. The children didn't disappear into a mountain. They built towns, they had children, their families are still there, 800 years later. So why the rats? If the most likely explanation is a locator and a mass emigration, why did someone need to invent a plague and a broken promise? Think about it from the town's perspective. Your children leave, voluntarily, because a stranger offered them something you couldn't, because the life you built wasn't enough to make them stay. That's a wound that doesn't close. But if there's a monster, if there's a deal that was betrayed, a curse, a villain who stole them, then it wasn't your fault. You were wronged. The piper cheated. The children were innocent. The rats gave the mayor a reason to break the deal. The broken deal gave the piper a reason to take the children. The children had no choice. Nobody's to blame. The story is bearable. The other one is not. The Brothers Grimm collected and published this tale in the early 1800s and cemented the rat version in Western memory. But the grief underneath it, the real grief of a real town, had been there for 5 centuries before them. And it's still there, in the street that won't let music play. So, is the Pied Piper real? Yes, in the only way that matters. 130 people walked out of Hamelin on June 26th, 1284, and never came back. That's not a fairy tale. That's in the town records. That's why a street still falls silent when a wedding passes. The piper, whoever he was probably a recruiter, a man doing a job, offering young people the one thing their town couldn't, a future. The rats? The rats were built by the people who were left behind, because it's easier to say your children were stolen than to admit they chose to go. And here's what I keep turning over. The story we tell, the monster version, the cursed version, it protects the parents. It makes them the victims. But the version the historians believe, the one belongs to the children. 130 people who looked at the life they've been handed and decided, no, something better is out there. I'm going to find it. That's not a tragedy. That's just leaving. The question I want to leave with you. If you were a young person in 1284 Hamlin, no inheritance, no land, no future, and a stranger showed up promising something better in the East, would you have followed? Drop your answer below. I genuinely do want to know. And if this one got under your skin, hit like and subscribe, because next time we're exhuming something you've definitely heard of, and the version you know is missing the part that actually matters. Some things don't stay buried.